I'm Eric Loy, and welcome to Eric Loy Interviews. On this podcast, we talk with folks from the VTuber community on their channels, their talents, their stories, where they come from, and their plans for the future. We'd like to say hello to Phy. Hi, Phy.
Hello. Thank you for having me on.
I appreciate it. Please introduce yourself to everybody.
Hello, I am Phy the Neutrophil, the single-celled immune system cell that is dedicated to helping you survive your daily interactions with all manner of pathogens. Here to teach you all about the interactions on a molecular scale.
Well, we need some more of you. Some folks do. Sometimes you get a little too much of you too. But I mean, we need to spread it out a little bit.
For sure. I do get that a lot from my chat. Every time I bring up a hyperactive immune system or allergies, they're very quick to point fingers at me in terms of placing blame.
Oh, allergies or something else. I mean, it's talk about that in some other time. But I want to talk about you and what you're doing with your channel. You're using it for kind of education, aren't you?
Yeah, that would be a good descriptor. So basically, me and my compatriots over at V Theorem Group, we are a bunch of VTubers who also do science communication. And Eric's actually interviewed a genmate of mine, Sidere, who is a psychologist, magical girl.
Yes.
And so what I plan, and not plan, I've been doing it for about a year, but what I've been using my channel for is science communication, a combination of long-form video as well as streams where I actually take the viewer through an actual real science paper. And I don't like to so for the long-form videos, that's like very classic YouTube video essay kind of deal.
Right.
But for the live streams, I actually like to show data and then have my audience come up with conclusions. I think it's a lot better for scientific transparency to allow the public to look at the data that their tax-funded dollars go to.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot.
Fund.
And not only that, but it's really great for the communicative value too, because you're giving them a lot more, not more skin in the game, rather than just kind of watching. They're in order for them to ask questions, they have to be interested in what's going on.
Yes, exactly. And I think my audience has sort of converged around, like biology undergraduates, which is, great to see, up and coming scientists, but also a lot of other people who don't necessarily have biology as their major interest. And so I've been really excited to interact with viewers who don't come from biology backgrounds, but who are deeply invested in the story of how we operate at a micro scale. So it's been a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. And one of the amazing things about what you're talking about is we're still finding out things. I mean, there's always new stuff coming up when they try certain types of things and maybe something works a little better on one thing than the other. We haven't got this science down 100% yet. There's still a lot more to learn.
Oh, for sure. I used to think, like, when I started my channel, that I would eventually run out of ideas, and there was a little bit of me that was actually afraid of that, because I'm like, do I have a strong enough charismatic personality to carry something without content for me to cover? But after a year of doing this, I've only begun to scratch the surface. Every year, every month, there are new and exciting discoveries that are being made within the realm of biology, and I'm very happy to share that with everybody in my audience.
Yeah, and it's always good. There's some folks who are in particular situations where it's tough for them to get any hope in as far as medical condition goes. But you never know when something is coming up that can turn things around a little bit. And it might be just the one study that finally proves X plus Y equals Z. and then of course it has to go through a lot of other different things. But just to be able to glimpse that little bit of hope means a lot to folks too.
Yeah, and I actually love that you bring that up. So if I could indulge myself by telling a little story about one of the most successful videos on my channel.
Please do.
Eric, have you heard of prions?
I have heard of them. Yes, I don't know a lot about it.
So a prion is a specific type of protein that, when misfolded, causes other versions of that protein to also misfold. So these are proteins that underlie some of humanity's most horrifying diseases like mad cow disease,
Hmm.
right? So have you heard of mad cow?
Oh, I certainly lived through that. Yes, from the
Yeah, yeah.
first time people paid attention to it. Yes.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, mad cow disease is a disease that humans can come into contact with if they eat infected beef. So in cows that have this protein, this misfolding builds up in the brain and causes these aggregates to form, which triggers neuronal cell death.
Hmm. Yeah,
And so once you've consumed this prion, it could take years for symptoms to show, but once they do start showing, or rather, when it is confirmed that you actually do have mad cow disease, it's essentially a death sentence.
yeah,
This
yeah.
thing aggregates in the brain, and there are no known treatments. And so when you talk about optimism, the prion video that I made on my channel, I had the opportunity to actually look very deep into the research around prion diseases. And, something that I grew up always hearing that this was fatal, there was no cure, no treatment,
Hmm.
that's actually starting to change. In fact, there are clinical trials ongoing right now for prion diseases
Mm.
that are set to wrap up, I believe, in January.
Oh,
So
cool.
there's always new and exciting fronts being fought against the battle against disease.
Oh, that's great. Prions, from what you tell me, um, they affect each other. Not necessarily. It's one of I hear about these things, and um, I don't always put them in my brain correctly. But it seems like if a prion is folded, then others around it seem to be affected by that. Am I right?
Yeah, sort of like how can I say this? I think the best way to think of a prion disease is maybe say you have a puzzle and the pieces of the puzzle fit together beautifully. And when things are folded correctly, everything is fine. So you actually have a prion protein naturally occurring in your brain called the major mammalian prion protein.
Mm.
And this protein actually has a healthy function when it's shaped correctly.
Mm.
Now, what a prion disease does is it takes that naturally folded protein and folds it incorrectly. So now this piece becomes corrupted.
Mm.
And this corrupted piece can force other pieces of the puzzle to misfold as well, to conform into their shape.
Mm.
So you go from a very friendly puzzle that, has very useful shapes for the body to something that doesn't have any use for the body that can cause other proteins of the same type to also take on that pathogenic behavior and structure.
Mm.
So
So in this case,
it's yeah.
to misquote the song, one bad apple can spoil a whole bunch of girls.
I think that's actually a really good analogy. Yeah, one bad apple, one bad prion protein can cause a whole bunch of healthy prion proteins
Yeah.
to misfold, aggregate, and to cause cell death. And again, for most of humanity, for the overwhelming majority of our lifetime, as just things that exist on this planet, there has been no known solution to this problem.
Mm.
And just recently, they're starting to look like some. So if you're interested in some more of these molecular stories about horrifying diseases and how they operate and what humanity is doing to tackle those problems,
Mhm.
you can go ahead and check out my channel.
Yep, we're gonna have all the links in the description for folks to do that. I find it interesting that we're just kind of in the last few years discovering something in our body that the body doesn't have the ability to correct. Uh, you would think with something that you say, well, you've got a problem with your white blood cell count. Well, maybe you can take this to increase it or decrease it. But this sounds like something that once it starts, the body does not fix it. It really does corrupt that system.
That's absolutely correct. And so we've had some interesting discussions on my stream actually talking about sort of why this even happens to begin with.
Mm.
Whenever you ask a biologist why, the answer is most typically because that's just how things evolved, right? So
Right.
if we think about the context of evolution, your body is essentially a meat suit that is programmed to ensure the successful passage of the genetic material inside of your gametes, so your sperm and your eggs. Now, I don't mean to say this to sort of make it all about, the purpose of life is about procreation. That's
Right.
absolutely not what I mean. We humans with our big brainy frontal lobes can choose what our life means. No one can choose our life's meaning for us, but
Right.
evolutionarily speaking, in terms of just how we have come to take the form that we currently take today, the purpose of the body is to make sure that the genes within us are passed along. And so the body not correcting the prion disease, you would think is some kind of glitch, but in reality, I would take the opinion that we did not need to deal with prion disease until we started living longer, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah,
to
that's
get
that,
genes from one generation to another, you don't have to be that old.
yeah, and that's something else too that we're kicking around as a society. Well, it's great, that you have folks living into their 90s and sometimes triple digits. Heck, I had my uh, great grandfather was 99. He had four 90-year-old kids. Um, and then on the other side of the family, one fellow from the 1800s lived to 106. I mean, that's pretty amazing back then. But you see it a lot more often now, certainly, because of everything that we can do to prolong the life. But with that, we've also jumped into territory that we've never seen before.
And that's, I think, such a beautiful encapsulation of sort of the human spirit, right? Because there are people out there who will try to reduce life into biological essentialism.
Mm,
Basically, we are creatures and our purpose is procreation and all this other stuff is not necessary. But we've built a society where we can sort of augment our existence on this planet. So living up to 106, you could argue, doesn't have any real evolutionary advantage.
mm,
But what it does say is that with our collaboration, with our education, with our ability to push technology, we have granted ourselves the ability to extract more from the one life that we have on this planet, if that's what you believe. And I think that's very nice. And on the topic of longevity, Eric, that is something that I will eventually start covering in journal clubs, the genetics, the biology of what makes species live more or less in terms of lifespan.
yeah,
So that's something that I'm looking forward to covering
yeah,
next year in 2025.
yeah. Because I mean, if you want to be really try to be simple about it, and you look at lifespan being an X value or whatever you decide to put it, then anything that if someone says, well, the lifespan of a human being should be 75, which is probably certainly a lot bigger than it would have been in the 1700s, but should be 75, and then everything that influences it from the outside will change that up or down. What you do to yourself changes that. Um, but that's not necessarily, there isn't really a constant for X, is there?
So let me ask you a question regarding this framing.
Yeah,
So do you mean that like underlying this unknowable static value of like how long a human should live
right.
versus the practical lived reality of how long people do live?
Hmm.
Uh, so let me think about that for a second.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to mess up my metaphors
No,
sometimes.
no worries, no worries.
Yeah.
So this is speculative because evolution is actually not my background. So
Mm-hmm.
to be very clear, I'm a cell and molecular biologist. So
Hmm.
I only understand evolution so far as I need
Right.
to make sure that my stuff makes sense,
Right.
right? So for someone who studies evolution, this might be an oversimplification, but what we do know is that part of living longer, this unknown X value that humanity has converged on biologically, you could try to make sense of it by saying that not hierarchical, but rather multi-generational families likely did impose an evolutionary benefit on the species as a whole, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine how hard it is to have a child and to take care of him on your own. Boy, wouldn't it be great if you had people who were not competing with you, who love you, who could help take care of that baby.
Right.
So it could be argued that this unknown X is still actually programmed within us, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense from a spreading genes point of view.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder with that because we can point to things like identical twins and say, well, they should have the same lifespan, but that may not be true. I mean, for some other reasons, something might happen, and there's something down the line. Maybe they're not exactly identical twins. And there's all sorts of things that go into that, or the randomness of the genes that you get from birth, because we can't say necessarily father X and mother Y are necessarily going to produce Z every time. It could be boy, girl, blonde hair, blue eyes, green eyes. There's a lot of difference, and I bet that would drive people in that field crazy trying to figure that out.
Yeah, so when sperm and eggs are created, there's a process of recombination. So you are, even before you get to the point where you are combining mom and dad, you are already scrambling your DNA before sperm gets introduced to egg. And to kind of untangle, all the factors that go into living a long and healthy life, that's also a field that's kind of, it's a field that one has to tread very carefully in, right? If anybody promises you something too good to be true, it likely is. So on my channel, we would not go into like, take this supplement or whatever to live longer. It's purely, what I do on my channel is not actionable generally. Is if you love the underlying science, but you don't quite care about, getting something to do, that's kind of what I cover. Just because, like, as a scientist, it is my utmost duty to make sure that the people I communicate to are not being taken advantage of. So I want to reel in the language a little bit, because longevity, as I'm talking about it, longevity is full of people who will try to sell you something you don't need.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in radio for a long time, so I heard a lot of those commercials.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you know all about it.
Yes, as far as radio people go, as long as the check's cashed, you could get that on the air. That's the way we looked at it. So, did you always wanted to be a scientist in this type of field?
I played with a lot of different career options when I was a kid. My first and my most longest career goal was to be a medical doctor. I had been raised by parents who were very insistent that I find a job that was stable and well earning. And doctor was one of the things that was an option. And I loved science. And so it seemed like a natural fit. I actually was talked out of that career option by my career counselor in undergraduate, who did the whole very typical pre-med talk. Every single person that wants to be a doctor has to talk to their medical professional advisor and answer the question, why do you want to be a doctor? And so I gave them an answer very similar to the answer I just gave you, of I want to help people, but I love science. And so my career advisor asked me, so why don't you just go to graduate school then? And that was a very obvious question, but being forced to answer made it really clear to me that I had no interest in talking to patients.
Yeah.
In fact, if I I would greatly prefer not to talk to people who are sick. Not because I don't like them because they're sick, but because if they're sick, they're probably in a bad mood and they're expecting me to fix them.
Oh, yeah.
And that comes with a whole bunch of pressure that I don't want.
Yeah.
And in reality, I just want to learn about cells and the biology of people. And so, I could go on and on about alternate career paths, but that would be the main divergence, is realizing that I could use my love of science not for medicine, but for, science.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine how frustrated a scientist is these days with being able to present a case for something, or a set of facts and a set of things that are true to somebody, and these days being able to have somebody simply just say no and have all that thrown back at your face.
Yeah, it's a problem that we've encountered quite a bit. You had Cideray on earlier, back before, and she knows a lot more about this than I do. But, and this is something that I've also talked to with my streaming community, is this kind of feeling of hopelessness that no matter how much good information good science communicators and scientists put out for the public, there's always going to be a chunk of the population that is not receptive to that kind of thing. Of course, nowadays, your system of belief has less to do with the information that you have consumed
Right.
and more to do with what you already want to believe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But in terms of like leaving on a note of optimism, though, while we overestimate how much our cognitive frameworks contribute to our conception of truth,
Hmm.
what I will say is that the reason why I continue to find what I do very meaningful is you never know who you've inoculated against BS, right?
Hmm.
So people who are entrenched in their own way of thinking, I might not be able to reach somebody who thinks, for example, that viruses don't exist, or for example, that vaccines don't work.
Hmm.
I might not be able to reach them, but there's a chance that content that I produce instills a trust for the scientific process in people who may be vulnerable to that manipulation in the future. And to me, that is important enough to continue what I am doing.
Cool. Good. Because I imagine it's just, I can't imagine. I can't put myself in the shoes of somebody who's that that much into the field to have all of the work that absolutely shows something to be 110% correct, and just somebody say, "No, I don't believe it."
Yeah, I mean,
Just,
it can be tough. It can
yeah,
be tough for
yeah.
sure.
Have you run? You haven't run into that on your streams, have you?
Crossing my fingers, I hope to not encounter people who are looking for confrontation so far.
Well,
So I count myself quite lucky.
yeah, I would think that's not really the audience that would be coming in for the stream anyway.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I don't really know who wants to click on a cartoon blue cotton ball to bully him.
Well, you never know these days.
Yeah, but
Go
on the
ahead.
structure of belief, though,
Mhm.
just if I may finish the thought,
Yeah.
I think part of people's dissatisfaction with institutional science is this idea that institutional science can be wrong and have an incomplete understanding of the facts. And so, if I may just remind people that while institutional science may not be correct in all cases, while there may be controversy, there may be conflicts of interest, institutions screw up, it still remains the best way to accumulate new knowledge of the truth through collaboration, through expenditure of resources, through public transparency of data, through rigorous peer review. This still holds to be, on average, the best way forward. Although the system, of course, could use improving,
Hmm.
it's not a reason to discredit all of mainstream science
Yeah.
off the bat.
Yeah. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that type of thing. Or,
Exactly. And
I
I really do feel because there are questions in biology that very much do have significant emotional consequences for people, right? It's safety that we're talking about. And
mhm.
safety always puts people in a fear kind of mindset. And unfortunately, there are no certainties in life. There are only statistics and p-values,
Yeah.
as I like to say.
Yeah. I tell people sometimes, and sometimes I live to regret it, but I still tell them the truth does not require your belief. You don't have to believe the truth, but it's still the truth. You can believe whatever you want, but this is still fact. And
Uh,
it's tough to bring
uh,
that to people sometimes.
Yeah, I'm actually going to push back on that a little bit,
Hmm.
Eric, in,
Okay.
in the sense of I think the idea of the truth being the truth, you know, while I believe that, I think it has remained a message that has been not very well received
Hmm.
in terms of people who need to be reached out by science communicators. I think it's maybe more appetizing to frame institutional science as an argument backed up by a lot of data
Hmm.
versus the truth. Because if you call institutional science the truth, then anytime the truth is even slightly wrong, people get into a huge fit.
Oh yeah, that is definitely true. And being a
Yeah,
former talk show host, I know exactly how that goes. In a
yeah, I
hurry.
bet it's unpleasant.
It wasn't. It wasn't when I was doing it. So what gave you the idea to do the streaming with this and create a model and a to you to do it with. What was your inspiration behind that?
Yeah, so back during the pandemic, actually, I had this idea with my partner, Toxo, short for toxoplasmosis, to sort of make an animation that was kind of like Cells at Work. I don't know if you've heard of that,
Hmm.
Eric.
Yes, I have.
And so we wanted to do this animation, but Toxo was very busy during the time. I was quite busy during the time, and if you didn't know, animation is very, very expensive. So
Yes.
we put together these storyboards that we never actually ended up using. Fast forward many years later, and I'm thinking, I started this YouTube channel, but this is actually like the third channel that I've started because the other two, I didn't like the format that I had done, and so talking to Toxo, I had come to realize that what would be most appropriate for me is to be shown on screen not as myself, because there are 1,000 billion gajillion dudes talking into camera about science type people.
Yeah.
What would be more true to who I am as a content creator would be to represent myself as Phy the Neutrophil.
Yeah.
And so that was really and also I love VTubers, right? So it's not just like, oh, what would be good, but also like, what would I love doing?
Yeah.
I would love to be a little cartoon cell explaining science to the world.
It's and we talk about technology of other things, but this type of technology is allowing people to do so many things for so many different people, or to at least present to so many people. The I said to folks before, the potential audience is basically 95% of the planet. And I mean, anybody who can get near a phone that has internet on it could be somebody who's watching you. Now, it's not going to be everybody at the same time, obviously, but you, to me, for somebody who started in radio in the '80s, um, it's like somebody opened up the entire space to me, and being able to talk with people. So, to see how many people are using it in innovative ways, to educate, to perform, to have fun with, and socialize, that type of thing, is it's still great to learn that people are doing it in new and different ways. And it seems like you really took the bull by the horns here.
Yeah, VTubing, even, within the category of streamers, VTubing has been very rewarding as well, considering I think there is an affect that you get when someone explaining science to you is not who you expect to be explaining science to you, right? So I kind of view science communication when done by people who fit the descriptor of an academic to be sort of not appealing isn't the right term, but
Dry?
Dry, yeah, dry. You could call it dry, or rather, there's a set of expectations. If you take like the mental characteristic representation of a scientist explaining science to you, you bring certain assumptions. This is going to be dry. This is going to be informative and not very fun.
Yeah.
But VTubing, you can be whatever you want as a VTuber. You can be whatever age. You can, look however, and none of that actually matters. And I think that we are going to see an explosion of people using VTubing as a method of education, because the avatar itself plays a crucial social role in sort of mediating that relationship between instructor and student.
Oh, I'm going to be doing a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
Man, I better start franchising.
Yeah.
Get that out there. But I saw that you recently played Plague Inc., which I think is absolutely hilarious.
Yes.
So many different levels.
That's actually how I got my start on YouTube, is by taking a look at all of the diseases in Plague Inc. and sort of pseudo ranking them, because first of all, if you haven't watched the Plague Inc. series, it's pretty good, but just watch knowing that, like, don't take the rankings too seriously. It's mostly just a way to talk about biology using something that you're familiar with.
Right.
I don't hold any of those opinions very strongly. It's just, a little bit of fun.
A little bit of an explanation of things going on with it and why this really doesn't work this way, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like, oh, people get this wrong impression that I hate Plague Inc. or that I think it's a bad game or that the science is bad. No, I actually think Plague Inc. is a great game. In fact, it's been officially endorsed by, I believe, the CDC
Mm.
as being a very effective way to teach people about how diseases spread.
Mm.
So I love Plague Inc. It's just that like some of the language used in Plague Inc. is interesting. They've made interesting choices with the communication.
Yes.
So
Well, it does.
if you
It really does show people how a, I mean, people how a disease can spread, or a germ or something can spread. Um, no one would think, well, birds and rats and all that, and then planes. I say if you don't have, if somebody doesn't have a airport, well, the planes aren't going to bring it. Or if you don't have a seaport, it's not going to come through boat. There's just certain ways that will explain that. But there's a reason why you always start in Greenland, because
well, actually, Eric, if I could softly correct you, nowadays the meta is to not start in Greenland, but to actually start in a high population country. If you're going for a Plague Inc. world record speed run.
oh, speed run, yeah, yeah, because eventually they'll get everybody else too. And then of course
Yeah.
there's the work on the cure. How realistic is the cure work for that sort of thing? I mean, they're obviously you're trying to work, if you're working as the as the as the deadly virus, you're trying obviously to subvert the cure and get rid of it. But does that really? I mean, it's different for every type of virus, isn't it?
Every virus has its own special way of evading
Yeah.
not only the immune system, but also vaccination technology and treatment technology. So, this is actually the bread and butter of my channel, is to cover how pathogens subvert the immune system, how the immune system fights back, and how drugs and vaccines interact with those particular pathogens, right? I find that immune system battle to be very, very cool,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I've focused most of my channel on. So let me give you a story to
Mm-hmm.
kind of walk you through the battle between one particular pathogen and everything in our body and drugs and vaccines and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So how familiar are you with tuberculosis?
Not particularly. I do know that there were treatments used for it that were that look odd to the average person, but seem to be working. I don't know that much about it.
So tuberculosis is one of the most deadly killers of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It is a pulmonary disease, so it is a bacteria that infects the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
And so tuberculosis is especially good at evading the immune system for several different reasons. I'll just highlight one example here. Tuberculosis, the actual preferred host in your body is a cell called the alveolar macrophage. Macrophages are white blood cells whose job it is to eat bacteria and to destroy them with chemicals, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so tuberculosis actually likes to infect these macrophages, especially in the lung, because macrophages in the lung are actually weaker than macrophages found elsewhere in the body.
Oh.
Now, why might that be? Alveolar macrophages, their primary job is actually to eat dust.
Mm-hmm.
You breathe in a lot of crap,
Right.
and the alveolar macrophage's job is to clean that dust up. And so if the alveolar macrophage were really strong, then anytime you get a little bit of dust in your lung, your immune system would essentially freak out. So alveolar macrophages have evolved to have a reduced immune response. So tuberculosis loves infecting these macrophages. Again, these macrophages were evolved to destroy tuberculosis, but actually tuberculosis evolved in turn to essentially take over the alveolar macrophage.
Wow. Oh, kind of like that.
Generally, when tuberculosis is avoiding destruction, it does something called inhibiting the phagolysosome from forming. So macrophages have their own little digestive system, little pockets of acids and enzymes that destroy things chemically.
Uh-huh.
And tuberculosis actually prevents the fusion of that pocket of acid with its own membrane. So basically, what happens is tuberculosis uses the body of the alveolar macrophage as a sort of shield from the rest of the body. And so as tuberculosis infects these alveolar macrophages, these macrophages form, I forget exactly what they're called, but they essentially form structures that are dead and dying. Granulomas, they're called granulomas.
Right.
Dying corpses of macrophages that get calcified, forming this sort of fortress of dead tissue. And the immune system can't penetrate that tissue, which is why tuberculosis is, for a lot of people, a lifelong reoccurring infection. You just can't get in those corpse castles, basically, to clear out the tuberculosis infection.
Yes. So is that why they would send people? Does it work better in climates that are more humid than drier climates? Because I think that was where they used to send people to Arizona all the time for this.
That's actually a really interesting question, and I don't actually know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I'll probably look it up later. That's interesting to think about, whether or not the climate can attenuate the disease.
Yeah.
But just to kind of finish off where the technology and vaccinations are going, right?
Yeah.
People have tried to treat tuberculosis, but because it hides in the corpses of macrophages, you can't actually get the drug into there. And so, in terms of evolution, if you hit tuberculosis, you have to hit it like a truck. You have to, I think there's like a cocktail of like 5 different antibiotics you have to use to even get close to controlling a tuberculosis infection.
Wow.
And so because tuberculosis is so good at evading treatment, it has time to actually evolve antibiotic resistance. It hides in those castles. And so if you don't kill everything, if even one tuberculosis manages to survive, that tuberculosis bacteria can potentially evolve resistance. And so when you're asking whether or not Plague Inc., whether or not it's realistic for these pathogens to out-evolve treatments and vaccines, the answer is absolutely yes. And that's, I think, one of the best parts of playing through Plague Inc. is this realization that pathogens have all sorts of clever ways they can evade and adapt and evolve.
Just one of the many things you're going to be able to learn if you check out what Phi's got going on. And we've got all the links we could find for you on the description for this interview. But we got to have you back sometime, because there's so much more to talk about. And I hope you do come back, because this is extremely, extremely interesting and important, too, at the same time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. If I could make one plug.
Absolutely.
I will be streaming for 12 hours on January 11th to do a marathon charity stream for glioblastoma. So glioblastoma is a particularly aggressive form of brain cancer, and I will be spending my entire day talking about brain cancer science, including a paper where the actual author, the professor behind the paper, asked to come on to discuss their research, which I found to be incredibly wonderful to be able to hear from the mouth of the scientist themselves.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for having me on, Eric.
It's an absolute pleasure, and it's great to be able to talk and discuss these things with you. And again, thanks to this medium, we get a chance to hear more and have that at our fingertips to be able to hear more about these things and educate ourselves from the folks such as yourself that know what they're doing and do it for a living. Please come back again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Eric Loy Interviews. Join us again next time when we talk to another member of the always interesting VTuber community.